Wedding cakes have long been part of the wedding tradition. The Romans used to crumble cereal cakes over the bride's head for good luck, and in the medieval period the bride and groom would kiss over a confection of small stacked buns. Throughout history, the wedding cake became more and more elaborate, and by the Victorian period they were the most elaborate ever. The traditional English wedding cake was a fruit cake because it had a long shelf life. And so when Victoria married Prince Albert in 1840, she also used a fruit cake. They had an elaborate wedding cake that weighed more than 140 kilograms or more than 300 pounds, and its circumference was about 3 meters wide. The allegorical figure of Britannia stands at the top, blessing the figures of the bride and the groom. Victoria's cake comprised of 3 tiers, and traditionally the top tier was saved, and it was saved for the christening of their offspring. As we do today, slices of cake were given to dignitaries and guests, and they were wrapped up in these lovely boxes. And this one actually outlived the royal couple, and it was sold by Christie's not that long ago. All of Victoria's children had elaborate wedding cakes, and it's often said that Victoria really started this tradition. So when her son, Edward, the future Edward VII, married Alexandra, future Queen Alexandra, they had a particularly elaborate wedding cake made for their wedding of 1863. This is Edward, Prince of Wales's most elaborate wedding cake. It's inspired by Gothic architecture. The cake was gorgeously decorated with garlands of flowers and ribbons, and there were also cameos of the groom and the bride on the other side. In 1893, the future George V married Mary of Teck, and they also had a beautiful wedding cake. Their beautiful wedding cake sits on a silver stand, and it's covered with white roses and other beautiful flowers. There are also lovers' knots of silver cords and shields with monograms and coats of arms of the bride and groom. We now jump forward into the 20th century to 1923. This is when Prince Albert, later George VI, married Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. Their 4-tier wedding cake was made by Huntley and Palmer's, and it was nearly 8 feet tall. This phenomenal cake was full of symbolism. For example, the bottom tier included 2 sugar lions modelled on those carved on the fireplace in the dining hall of Glamis Castle, which is where Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon grew up. And at the very top of the cake, it was surmounted by a silver vase which contained a bouquet including York roses, because of course at this time they were the Duke and Duchess of York. And then in 1947, we had the marriage of Elizabeth, the future Elizabeth II, to Philip Mountbatten. Their cake was absolutely amazing as well. Their wedding cake was made by McVitie and Price Limited, and it comprised 4 tiers reaching nearly 9 feet tall, and it weighed 500 pounds. Because rationing was still underway in the UK at the time, many ingredients for the fruitcake had to be flown in from Australia and South Africa, where they had been donated by members of the public. Elizabeth's wedding cake, as you can imagine, was decorated with loads of symbolic references. For example, the base had the bride's and groom's crests, also had references to Windsor Castle, Buckingham Palace and Balmoral Castle. Apparently icing the cake took 5.5 weeks, and it involved creating 700 piped pieces that were then later attached to the cake. Apparently one of the tiers of this cake was actually sent to the Girl Guides in Australia because they had been so instrumental in collecting the ingredients to make the cake. And then the top tier was saved for Prince Charles's christening.